So now we're moving into the third part of this philosophy of animation. And here we're moving into the kind of final idea in which we're exploring the idea that animation is not necessarily defined by the construct, but by the rules of the narrative that are imposed, which are most naturally occurring within drawn material of some sort. And the way we're going to look at it is by looking at an example of a film that removes the animation, so to speak, from it, and is an actual live action film that functions as an animation. Now, we Americans are fickle audiences, and we have talked before about, we'll accept certain outrageous things in our stories, but we need a reason. We can't just go easily with really exaggerated norms. And so, as an example, for 40 years, 45 years, China was putting out these incredible, and the area was putting out these incredible martial arts films, but American audiences, as the mainstream, couldn't get into them. The flying through the air, the ballet, the exaggerated stuff. It's like, but that's not how it works. That's not real. We needed something to ease us into it, to accept this narrative construct. And so in 1999, the Wachowskis came along and said, oh, it's because they're in a simulated reality where they can bend the rules of physics. And that's enough for us to say, oh, okay, cool, right? And then we can just go with it. And of course, funnily enough, that opened the door to a lot of audiences to being willing to accept classic martial arts films. Other times, of course, it's because the story itself is so cartoonish. It is, in fact, anchored in the idea of, look what a cartoon this is. But again, we need the magic of it. We need to be told, oh, it's because of this magical mask that has turned this actor, who is, of course, cartoonish, into a living cartoon. But what happens then when we take traditional comics and turn them into movies? Well, often we praise them for looking just like a comic. And usually what we're referring to is, of course, the visual layout, the color scheme, the backgrounds. But we're still imposing the rules of a live narrative. Maybe we're willing to bend them a little, what people look like. So if it's a superhero film, we'll accept the rules of the superhero story. But we won't go further than that. All right, so what happens then when we take a basic, ordinary story and suddenly it becomes an animation in its narrative structure? That's what happens here. When we start this film, it's very familiar, and we get some hints early on that it's a little bit quirky, but we have this main character. He's a young guy. He is in a band. He's trying to make his way in the world. He's dating this girl who is too young for him. She's a great person, but she's definitely too young. And again, we're seeing little bits very early on. For example, at one point the band is practicing, and we see the sort of electric bolts coming off of them because they are so great, right? So we get little hints that this is not going to be a traditional, normal story, but most of it is. He's in the band, they get into the battle of the bands. Okay, this is a story about their band trying to make it, and oh, what do you know? Then he meets another girl, and he's torn between the two of them. We know this story. We know this narrative. And then this happens.
Mr. Pilgrim! It is I, Matthew Patel. Consider our fight begun.
What did I do? What do I do?
Fight! All right.
Watch out! It's that one guy.
Ha!
And now you have Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And many of you have probably seen this. This is a film that when it came out, flopped. There was all kinds of excitement about it. Total bomb. Why? Because that moment, even though we've had little hints that we're not in a traditional sort of norm universe, comes out of nowhere. To the extent that many people were like, is he dreaming this? What is going on? What is happening? And couldn't kind of keep going with it. But if that had been completely animated, we would have just rolled with it, figuring, oh, an explanation of some sort is coming. So this is a film by Edgar Wright, and many of his films follow this same structure. If you've seen Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz or at the World's End, they all follow this same basic. Oh, okay, I know this story, and then we get the sudden left turn. Here, so we get big moments like that, but we also get these sort of elements throughout that typically are confined to the animation construct. And again, if you can't go with it, you're not going to like it at all. And that's why it was neglected at first. And it was also, in a way, because it is a fantastic movie, why it was destined to become sort of a cult classic, because over time, enough people discover it. And of course, they don't identify, oh, it's the rules of animation. But they're seeing this is really interesting. And if you can accept the narrative construct, there's a really terrific story being told here. Now, it has an advantage, is it based on a graphic novel series. We see, some elements that are directly translated. We see the basic story being told, some attempts at physical replication, but it's not trying to say, oh, let's put the comic on the screen. It's saying, let's use the rules from the comic in what we're allowed to do within the story. And that's what makes it distinct. And that's how, if you approach this film as an animated film, it just happens to have living actors in it, it completely opens it up. And that's the kind of thing we're going to be looking at, which makes it especially interesting. Also, the fact that seriously, the whole time we're being like, wait, is that who I think it is? Everyone is in this film. Okay, what are we going to be doing with it? Basically just that. We're going to be talking about how is he using these animation elements within it. If you have read the graphic novels or are interested in them, look at some of them. Look at how the comparison, how are they the same and different. The last piece gets a little more in-depth. This is a film that assumes you are extremely familiar with video games, movies, the hero's journey. In fact, there's a deleted scene where they sort of mock that this movie follows the hero's journey. In what ways is this a film that gets into the cultural zeitgeist? Zeitgeist is the spirit of the time, the sort of the feel of a certain age. So those are the kind of things we're going to be digging into and talking about. So we'll be setting up a time for a viewing. We'll do a discussion, and we'll kind of tie together all these ideas of how this opens up Scott Pilgrim in particular, because it is a movie that you'll see has a lot of anachronisms that keep it from feeling like, oh, this is so 2010 or so 1999 or whatever. They bring in elements from all across time, and because it's in this animation feel, it becomes a story about something bigger. It's not a profound film, but it is a film that you are able to connect with on a personal level, because it can transcend the limitations of this is a story about that actor and that actor and that character, etc.